back to Ready to Homeschool 6-month countdown. We are on week 25, setting up your space. This can be downloaded from www.hilarioushomeschooling.com. And so what we're talking about today is how to get your space, your homeschool spot in the house. And a lot of this is going to depend on what your method of homeschooling is, that the philosophy that you believe in the most. We talked about that during week 16, and we talked about how every person who has a different homeschool approach, that's going to impact everything that they do. So if you have figured that out, what your homeschool approach is going to be, then it will be a little bit easier to decide how you want to set up your space. If you're still trying to think about, which philosophy you really fit in with the best, then this is not going to be your easiest lesson. I actually struggle with talking about this because this is not my strength. I am not good at setting up a space. I tend to be a cluttered person, kind of a hoarder. And so we have stuff everywhere. And so because of that, even though I can come up with a very theoretical, ideal way that we're going to do homeschool, it usually degenerates into some other form before the school year is out. And I don't really get discouraged about it anymore. I used to want to keep everything exactly like I had it idealized at the beginning of the year. But now I'm more familiar with, okay, this is our family's usual rhythms, and this is the way that our house adapts to those rhythms. And I don't necessarily need to beat myself up because I didn't predict that. I mean, there's no real way for you to know how your family's going to react and where your stuff needs to be. You can try to predict it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, just by thinking through some things. But this is going to morph. Remember how I said, plan 6 weeks and then you're going to change your mind about the way that you're doing things? Same thing. I wouldn't put a ton of work into designing a homeschool space before you start. I would make sure you had your supplies and your curriculum and some basics like pencils and paper. But I wouldn't spend a ton of time painting a whole room or putting in a chalkboard. You may find that those things are better done over the Thanksgiving and Christmas break once you've seen how your family adapts homeschool to your regular life. So with that said, I just want to help you think through some thoughts, some questions, and give you some suggestions, but this is not my area of expertise. If you have a homeschooling friend that you have already connected with, this would be a fun time for you to ask if you could just sneak over and see how they do things, where they set things up, and what kind of systems they have in place. A lot of moms are very happy to share that with you because they kind of get to show off how they've thought through what they are doing. You can also if a friend doesn't want you coming over, you can just ask them to take some screenshots of some different spaces in their home that show their homeschool. Or because we have the internet now, you can do Pinterest and Google and find a lot of ideas for what to do. But remember, Pinterest is showing off the most ideal spots at the most ideal times. They are not necessarily going to show you what it looks like when kids are actually homeschooling and making a mess in that space. So try to keep yourself from comparing the way that your homeschool day plays out with the way that somebody presented their homeschool space on Pinterest. Okay? All right. If you are going to embrace a traditional homeschool philosophy, you are probably going to lean toward wanting a separate space with some school desks, one per kid, a chalkboard, all of that kind of stuff. You are going to want to find a spot like that in your house. You can do it without it, of course, but that's going to be your tendency because you're trying to copy the school model in your home. If you are embracing unschooling, where everything that you do in life is learning and you don't really need a separate space, then your home's going to reflect that. And somebody who comes in may not even be able to tell that you homeschool. It'll just look like a very fun place to be because there might be, art projects or crafts or science books. There's all sorts of ways that you can add a layer to what's already in your home and just make it a more enriching environment. Okay, so when you're trying to choose a spot, I have some questions for you to think through. And these are some considerations. How much space can you actually carve out that is only for homeschooling? Some families live in 5-bedroom houses and they can easily set aside 1 bedroom to be the homeschool room. Other families are living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and there's just no space left over to dedicate to just homeschooling. And you can homeschool both ways, but just think through that before you try to envision what your ideal spot is. Do you have any overflow storage space somewhere else in your house? A lot of times you are not using all the books that you bought all year long. If you're studying the weather for like 3 or 4 weeks, those books don't necessarily have to stay out, or the weather supplies don't have to stay out for the whole rest of the year. So there's another place in your house possibly that could hold a couple extra boxes or bins, and you can kind of, take it down there while you're not using it and then bring it back when you are using it. There are a few reference books that you're probably going to want to keep accessible to your kids all year long. And so you're going to need to think through, what are those reference books? Like a dictionary, a thesaurus, maybe an encyclopedia set, or a small history encyclopedia, some maps. You just kind of think about, when you get your curriculum for the year, kind of put it into 2 piles, like things we need to have every day and things we only need to have for the certain unit studies. And then get those other books out of the way so that they're not cluttering up your spot that you have designated for homeschooling. If you are using electronic devices or computers, you're going to need to think about how accessible you want those to be to the space that you have. It may be that you need to have a power strip that helps you charge all of your devices at once. It might be that you have to stay really close to your router, depending on what kind of strength you have for Wi-Fi. So think about where that is. Some people like to do school far away from the everyday action. And when I say everyday action, I mean cooking, the basic room where you do most of your living, whether that's the living room or an office or a den or whatever. Laundry. There's certain things that moms are doing, or dads are doing throughout the day. I check my computer a lot because the part-time job that I have requires a lot of communication. I'm also cooking a lot and doing dishes a lot. And we have frequent visitors on our farm, so I like to stay close to the window and where I can see the driveway and our door. So for us, it makes more sense to homeschool right in the kitchen and living room area. But the ideal homeschool spot that I had picked out many, many years ago was actually upstairs in a loft. But we discovered that was far from ideal. It worked to isolate us from other distractions, but I couldn't start, boiling the water for spaghetti if I wasn't downstairs. Sometimes people would come and knock on the door and we wouldn't even hear them because we were too far away from that part of the house. So the way that I envisioned homeschool at the very beginning of our years is not where we stayed. We actually have more of a storage area in that spot now, with all of our homeschool curriculum upstairs away from our everyday stuff. So what I'm saying here is that we actually morphed our homeschool into being in the kitchen and the living room and using that homeschool area as more of a storage spot. Maybe you can provide a study space that is quiet in a different part of the house. Maybe it's not necessarily that you're going to homeschool in a different part of the house, but that there's a quiet nook somewhere that you can set up with a small desk or a comfy chair and some homeschool supplies and some books. And that's just a place for some of your older kids to go and do some of their more independent study work, so that they don't necessarily have to be where all the action is. You've set it up for them to be successful. Whenever they take their items to that other corner, they'll have what they need there. Sometimes families go on trips, or they have a lot of errands to run during the day, or they're part of a lot of different co-ops or lessons out of the house. And so they find themselves doing something that I call car schooling, where you actually are having your school books along with you in the car. And whenever you drop somebody off and you have a 10-minute waiting period, then the mom pulls out, the kid's reading book and has them read to them for those 10 minutes. So are there any items that you could put into a backpack where, as you're heading out the door, you can say, hey, bring that reading backpack and we'll do a lesson while we're gone? What types of materials do you need everyday access to? This would be things like the pencils, the 3-hole punch, scissors, paper clips. So more like setting up a little home office. You're going to want to think about what you use on an everyday basis, and not just office supplies, but also like if they have curriculum that you're using every day. So certain workbooks, and sometimes curriculum comes with all sorts of little pieces, especially when you're teaching phonics. There are some phonics programs that have, you know, all the letters of the alphabet on a tray that you're supposed to keep handy and pull out. So look over your curriculum and see what kind of things there are, because it's not just school books. Sometimes there's other materials that educational curriculum put in and say, keep this handy every day. The other school supplies you might also need, like 3-ring binders or notebooks or sheet protectors. So when you get your systems in place, it'll be a little bit easier to predict what you're going to have within arm's reach. But you need to think about that when you're starting to pick out your spot, because that means you need a spot that has some shelving, or maybe you have a spot that has a desk already with some drawers in it that you can fill and stock. Or maybe you need to buy one of those little plastic utility carts that you can just set in a corner, and that's got your homeschool stuff in it. Another consideration is, do you need to occupy toddlers or preschoolers while you teach older kids? If you do, then you're going to need a space that the toddlers and preschoolers can be in the same room with you and possibly working on something that is going to help them stay quiet and occupied while you're teaching the older kids. Some families like to have a bin that is just for the kids. They call it, you know, your schoolwork box, the busy box. It's items that only come out during those special times when you are trying to get some uninterrupted time with an older kid, or when the family's doing a read aloud and the kids can do something quietly at the floor. So you're thinking of things like beads and lacing things, like little shoestrings, or maybe a box of Play-Doh if you have a place where they can play without making a big mess on the carpet, or sometimes small puzzles that are ideal for little hands, not with a billion pieces, but the ones where, you know, they can just work quietly in the same room. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of our series, is that your kids need to develop an attention span. So this is a skill that you're going to be working on with your preschooler or your toddler, that, you know, during this time that you're working with so-and-so, they need to stay quiet and busy over here with this activity. And that's going to take some training as well, because that doesn't just happen naturally. Toddlers and preschoolers want your attention almost constantly. So the best thing is to do something fun with your toddler or preschool for a few minutes. Maybe get them started on the activity that you have in the busy box for that day, and then turn your attention to the older child and just kind of keep that one going, whatever they're playing with, whatever you set them up with. Sometimes it's helpful to have a busy box already put together, no doubt, but it's also helpful to have maybe a list that you just develop ahead of time, where you have a couple tricks up your sleeve of things that you can pull out to do with them if they get really, really whiny or needy while you're still trying to finish a lesson. And I wouldn't tell them what that is ahead of time, and I wouldn't promise them that they're going to get that. I would simply have it in the back of my mind that if my toddler or preschooler starts to get needy, I'm going to, you know, go to this cabinet, pull out this one thing and hand it to them and tell them to play with that for the last 10 minutes while I finish whatever I'm doing with so-and-so. This develops over time. There are no easy answers. One of my favorite tips for this was written by Diane Hopkins. You can look it up. It's called The Baby is the Lesson. And one of the things that she emphasized is that the attitudes that you give as you deal with your preschool or toddler are going to be modeling what you want your attitude for your older kid to be. If you're always telling your preschooler or your toddler that they're a nuisance, that they're annoying, that they're bothering you, that attitude is going to be conveyed to your older child, and they're going to treat their sibling in the same way. You're a nuisance, you're bothering me, go away. If you can help your older kids value their siblings by showing them, okay, yes, this baby is interrupting our time, but this baby is a valued member of our family. And even though he or she is younger than you, we're going to care for her needs and take care of her during this time. And that means we actually need to prioritize her needs above the academic lesson. That's a fine line to walk. It's not going to be easy to know when to do each one. You just kind of have to walk with the Lord on this one, because Only he can give you the wisdom to know when you're telling the baby or the toddler to be quiet another 5 minutes, or when you say, all right, we've gone far enough on this lesson. I really need to take care of what they need. So that's a hard thing. And everybody's growing in that. It's also you as a mom or parent growing in maturity to know how to handle all the different needs that your various kids have all at the same moment. Okay. And also the last question here, we would be more likely to accomplish the whatever lesson if we. So this is just to help you think, all right, if I really do want to do art once a week, what can I do now to set myself up for success? You know, where can I put the art supplies so that we will actually go and get the art supplies out? A lot of times we have these grand plans during the summer of how we're going to accomplish all the different curriculum that we bought. And we get so excited and we plan to do it all and we have it all in the house. But you know, that day in November when it's rainy and everybody's angry and everybody's hungry and it says to do the art lesson, nobody's in the mood. All you want to do is just put on Netflix and crawl under a blanket for 5 hours and you're not going to get the art lesson done that way. So think about what can you do now? Where can you put your supplies now to set yourself up for success in the future when you are, you know, kind of not really feeling like going to whatever corner you stashed all that stuff and digging it out. Because if it's hard to find, you're going to be less likely to do it. So think about where you could store the things that you need, or if it's more than just an art lesson every few weeks, you know, if you have a math lesson every day, you're going to need a calculator, maybe an abacus, maybe a hundreds chart. What are the different things that you're going to be able to use every day or want to use every day? And where can you keep those so that you're not always telling the kids, oh, just a minute, I need to go find this. I do that a lot. Remember, I'm a clutterer, a hoarder. There's a lot of things that I know I have, but I can't find it at the moment that I want it. So if I could spend some more time in the summer preparing for where those items are going to be stored, I would be a little more successful in our homeschool. Okay, last part here is talking about homeschooling systems. This is talking about that part where you're going to have some procedures in place that are going to help you keep your homeschool running smoothly, that you have already conveyed to your kids what you want them to accomplish and where you want them to put the finished work and where they can find this or that or whatever without coming to bother you every time. Not that they're a bother, but if they can find it by themselves, they are more likely to accomplish it when you have assigned it. So this simply is going to ask you to think through several other considerations. And this will also impact your space because depending on how much stuff you want to store of their records or of their finished work and where you want them to put that, you may need to have an inbox on your desk, or you may need to have several inboxes on your desk, or a stack of folders, or a 3-ring binder. So these are all things that you want to think about as you're thinking about setting up your space, but it's more of the paperwork side of it, which again, I am not very good at. So if you have somebody in your life who's doing a great job of this, talk to them. They're going to give you better advice than me. All right. So you need to convey to your kids, what does it mean to be ready for school? And what time do you want them ready for school? And what exactly do you want them doing at that time? So, you know, a lot of times in a public school classroom, the teachers will say, you need to come to class prepared with a sharpened pencil, a notebook, and your book. And you need to be in your desk when the bell rings. Okay, well, that's public school, and kids can get good at that if a teacher consistently teaches it. We tend to be a little more informal and relaxed in homeschool, but you can still ask your children to be ready for the day at a certain time and be in a certain spot at a certain time. So for our family, that looks like being in the homeschool area, which is our couch, with their pencil and their Bible sometimes. I didn't always require the Bible, but sometimes, and a notebook. And then their biology notebook this last year, because we were going to be taking notes almost every day. So, and I would ask them to be ready. And they always came with a blanket too. They all loved curling up on the couch with their blanket. So that would usually be the one thing they remembered. And I would have to remind them, we're doing biology, you need your notebook. So this is what you're trying to communicate to them to help them to be more independent, more prepared, less nagging, What do you want them to be, where? What do you want them to have with them, where, when? Just communicate that ahead of time. And again, you can try this out for 6 weeks, and then you might have to make a change. If you are interrupted by a visitor or a phone call, what do you want your kids to be doing during that time? If you do not prearrange with them what to do when the phone rings, I am telling you, it is going to be crazy, okay? You're going to have to escape to a back bedroom to even have a normal conversation, and the rest of the house is just going to erupt. Or they're all going to scatter, and you're going to have to go find them when your phone call is done. Sometimes I can tell who's going to be on the phone, and I can tell I'm either not going to take the call right then, or I can tell that it's going to be a long call, and I just dismiss them and say, we'll be back, we'll start again in an hour, depending on what the needs are for the day. So just plan ahead and figure out how you want to handle interruptions, because they are going to happen. Another thing that you can do to be more successful is when you have your schedule figured out for the day, and we covered that in a previous lesson, where can you put that so that your kids can see it, so that they can help get themselves on track? The same thing with a chore chart. If they're always asking you what's for dinner, where can you put the menu? These are things that they can cut down on the number of questions that they're asking you, and you can develop a little bit more independence if you will just tell them where those things can be found on a regular basis. Okay, when they complete an assignment, what do you want them to do with it? If it's in a notebook, do you want them to rip it out and put it somewhere? Do you just want their notebooks on your desk every Friday so that you can grade them over the weekend and hand them back on Monday? Do you want to see them before they even go off and play so that you can see if they did a good job or if they need to redo the assignment before they're released for the day? How do you want to handle completed work? Especially when your kids are independent and you haven't been grading them as they've been doing the assignment with you, then you really need to have some kind of a system in place. There was one time that I let it go too long, probably 2 weeks, where I hadn't graded my daughter's math homework. And when I did grade it, I was amazed at the one concept that we really weren't covering very well, and how she had just forged ahead and completely learned it the wrong way. And for 2 weeks, that's a lot of unlearning and relearning that has to happen. So I learned that way that I need to be more consistent. I need to keep up a little bit more on keeping track of what assignments they've done, what they got right and what they got wrong, and how I usually made them go back and fix their mistakes. Not always, but in my opinion, there's no point in giving them a grade less than an A if they're willing to work for it and redo the work. I want them to learn the material to mastery. I don't want them to say, oh, I guess I just don't understand fractions very well. Too bad, so sad, and move on with life. I want them to say, well, I guess I'm going to have to learn fractions in order to get through this class, because otherwise I'm going to be taking the class all over again. Now, it wasn't always like that. There were a few classes where I just said, all right, I think we're going to call this good, and, gave them a C because we just needed to move on with our life. Depending on how your child is with academics, that will make a difference in that decision as well. And I did not start grading until high school either. I should say that. Most of the time, I would just make them go back and redo their work until it was correct. And in that case, there was always 100%. So it wasn't until high school that I started keeping grades for their transcript. Okay, when they are stuck on their homework, but you are busy teaching another child or on the phone or gone for the day, if they get stuck on their homework, what do you want them to do? Are you going to punish them for not finishing their homework when they got stuck on a question and didn't understand it? Are you going to ask them to go to Khan Academy and learn it from somebody else besides you? Do you want them to ask an older sister or an uncle or a grandparent, even if they might teach it in a way that you didn't expect to be taught? Different people have different methods of teaching all sorts of things. And so depending on what your strategy is with your kids, you might welcome outside input, and you might want them to just only listen to what you have to say about how to learn a certain subject. So when they're stuck on their homework, what is your policy for that? What do you want them to do? And if they're stuck on all their homework, and they can't do anything independently, especially when they get to be around 7th or 8th grade, you might have to consider dropping down a grade in their curriculum. You may have picked something out that was too challenging for them. All right, so then what is your policy about when they're finished with the day? Can they go on technology right away? Can they disappear to play Legos? Can they run around outside? And how will they know when they're released? Or are you going to do recesses during the day? And how will they know that it's time for recess? Some of this sounds like I'm a real control freak, and I probably am. I have loosened up a little bit over the past few years, but I guess when you're raising 6 kids and you have a lot going on, you kind of do have a need to be more controlling of what's happening in your home so that you can accomplish your goals. All right, the last 2 items have to do with record keeping. How do you want to compile records for the year? You don't have to compile records for the year. Not everybody does. But if you are in a state where you are required to show some kind of portfolio at the end, or you need to have some kind of record of attendance or some kind of proof that you have accomplished the curriculum that you said you were going to accomplish, you are going to want to keep some kind of records. And it's better to keep them organized from the beginning than to go back through a Rubbermaid tote at the end of the year digging for all the things that you can't find. And I know that from firsthand experience. So if you're going to need to submit a portfolio to anyone around April or May, you should be asking them in August, what kind of format do you want me to use? If they want a 3-ring binder organized by a certain way, then you go out and buy the 3-ring binder in August and organize it that way so that you can add the papers to it as you get them finished. If they don't have a method and they just say, just give me whatever you've got, then you're going to want to do a little more research on what other people have done for portfolios so that you can make up something and not have to be scrambling at the last minute. It's much easier to do it at the beginning of the year and fill it in as you go than it is to create it at the end of the year and wish that you had had, this certain paper, or I wish I would have remembered to write this down. It's always better to do it forward thinking. It doesn't always happen, but it's usually better. Okay, and the last one is, how do you want to store the school keepsakes? There are certain items that you end up treasuring as a parent, and you may want to use them at a graduation display or some other future event for your child. So if you see one of those things come across your desk, how do you want to store it? Do you want to have boxes that for every year? Do you want to just have, one file that is per kid as they grow up? These are things like when they handwrite a poem or a Bible verse and color a border around it. Those are precious. Or maybe they've written a letter to a friend and you take a copy of it before you mail it away just because of some of the things that they said in it. It could be an art project that you did together for weeks and you just think it turned out so nice, and it just captures who they are at that age. So different things like that you're going to want to save. And maybe you're not. Maybe you're not a hoarder. Maybe you're not a cluttered person. So maybe you won't want to save it. Maybe you just take a picture of it on your phone and you hang on to the picture. I don't know how your family does things like that, but it's worth considering now before you start gathering all your records. The second page is just several suggested methods. Remember I said I'm not very good at this, so I went online and I found some different resources that you could use to get started on researching this a little bit more. The first one is a lady who put together a little blog post telling about her, when they had a big house and she was able to do a wonderful homeschool room just the way she wanted it. And then they moved into a much smaller house and she had to adapt how she did homeschool to the smaller space that they had. So that might be interesting to look at because she contrasts both ideas. The second idea, the second thing that I put on there, the link, this is a blog post of somebody who is making a 3-ring binder, or she actually found something called a disc-bound notebook where it kind of looks like those really expensive planners that have little notches down the side of one side of the paper, and then the notches kind of fit into some rings that are all down the side. And so you can actually build your own planner or record keeping book by buying the special punch that will put the notches in the paper and the little discs. And so she explains that whole system, and she explains how she uses it to make her kids some customized planner at the beginning of the year that has their assignment sheets in it, and also the curriculum guide, she called it, what she wants them to accomplish for the whole year. And then they can actually add to their notebook just by using that special punch and sliding it in wherever they want to. So I have never used that before. I use ring binders, but I have never used a disc-bound notebook planner. So I thought that was a neat idea. The next article is by Diane Hopkins, who I talked about a little bit before. She came up with an idea to make a visual chart, kind of like it's poster size, and it has like little places where you can put Velcro. And then as they finish their assignment, it moves from one row to the other row to show at a glance that they have finished their reading work, and they've finished their handwriting work, and they've finished their math work. And so it's much simpler for little kids to use, and it's also a good way for the mom to see what still has to be done for that day. The next idea is called the crate system, and this is a little extreme in my opinion, but I think a lot of people have made it work for them. They take 36 folders, and 36 folders is because one per week, but they also have individual folders inside of those, one per kid, a different color per kid. They take all of their workbooks for the year and they cut the binding off and rip it apart. And then they divide the work into those 36 folders so that each week they just have to pull out a folder and it has all of their work in it for that week. I think that can work. We tend to not always go at the same pace that I anticipate. And so I think that for our family, I would have a great time putting it into the 36 folders. And then I would spend the rest of the year trying to rearrange the folders based on, well, we didn't finish math this week and we finished a lot more language arts than I expected, so I need to pull some more forward. And I think that I would just get really confused and frustrated. So I haven't ever done that, but some families love it. The next one is called an open and go classification folder. And these are those special charts that you would see like in the old-fashioned doctor's office, where it looks like a file folder, but when you open it up, there's these little prongs that come out, and then you can have this and this and this and this, and it just keeps going. So this open and go classification folder, the lady who talks about how to do that, she is adapting the crate system because she did have 36 folders, one per week, but then when it comes time for the child to do their week's work, she just pulls out that entire folder and then she puts it onto the different prongs of the classification system, and along with some reference materials that they're going to need for that week. And so the child really just has this one very thin folder that they need to use all week long, and it's got all their subjects in it. This works better for younger kids than for older kids. And with my luck, that one folder would go missing and we'd have no homeschool to do for the whole entire week. So I guess I'm giving you the pros and the cons of all of these systems. I'm just telling you from my perspective if it would have worked for our family or not. Okay, and then the last item on there is just this one mom did a 5-day challenge of how to organize your homeschool room to be ready for homeschooling. And so the first day is linked there, but then you could follow the other links to find what else she has to say. And basically, she's just reminding you that there's a lot of different pieces to homeschooling. And if you can start off with most of those pieces contained at the beginning of the year, you have a better chance of being successful. And she uses some office supply store stuff. Like if you went to Staples and went up and down the aisles, you would find all sorts of containers that you could use. And so when you buy those containers and you bring them home, then you can, start putting the puzzles in this container and the rubber bands in this container and the marbles in this container. I would recommend figuring out which containers you need first and which containers fit your space best, and then going shopping. Otherwise, you could come home with way too many containers because they all looked so great at the store, and then having none of them really fit your needs. So I would say that I tended to be way too cheap to go out and buy a bunch of containers. I usually would save the, shoe boxes, and then use the shoe boxes to organize my my shelves because I didn't like to go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff. You are probably going to need to set up a little bit of an office, a little bit of home office, and maybe in more than one spot. So don't be afraid to, invest a little bit of time and energy and money at the beginning of the year to make sure you've got pencils, erasers, pens, a protractor and compass if it's necessary, calculator, notebooks, folders. But instead of just going on a big shopping spree, you can think about what system is going to work best for you and then make your shopping list. So that is all I have for you this week. We have 1 week left in our series of the 6-month countdown. I'm really hoping that this has been helpful to you and that you are feeling more ready to homeschool. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to set up your space and make it a successful place for your family to feel at home and to accomplish your schoolwork. So I'll talk to you next week. Thanks.